Joining me in the studio is Professor Patrick Hornbeck. He is the chair of the theology department at Fordham University. In Detroit, Rabbi Jason Miller, an entrepreneur and a popular blogger and member of Rabbis Without Borders. And in Washington, D.C., Imam Yahya Hindi, president of Clergy Beyond Borders and director of Muslim Life and Chaplaincy at Georgetown University. Imam Hindi, first question to you, just for definitional purposes, what do you consider to be religious identity? What does it mean to identify someone as a practicing Muslim?
For me, a practicing Muslim is someone who believes in the three principles, that love is the essence of faith, forgiveness is the essence of religion and religiosity, and humility is the essence of humanity. And therefore, for me, Islam stands on the concept of love, forgiveness, and humility. The idea of to believe in God, you have to practice these specific values of love, forgiveness, and compassion.
Briefly, Imam, could you explain to our American audience how it is that those concepts generally don't get to be mentioned when we are looking at what are regarded as extremists who, in the name of your religion, practice violence?
You know, Muslims are very clear about where they stand. We believe that violence has no religion, that terrorism has no religion, that those who advocated violence in the name of Islam do not speak on behalf of the Quran, do not speak on behalf of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be with him, and do not speak on behalf of a faith that teaches justice and love and compassion. We want people to distinguish between Islam as a religion and the culture of Muslims. Not every Muslim or who claims to be Muslim practices these values, very much like not every Christian practices Christianity, and not every Jew practices Judaism.
Rabbi Miller, let's talk about what religious identity means in everyday life according to Jewish teachings. For example, should one's religious beliefs dictate work practices where there's a conflict with the religious belief? Here in America, of course, we have the case of the county clerk, Kim Davis, who refused to issue civil marriage licenses to same-sex couples. What does Jewish religious teaching say about something like that?
Well, I think when it comes to not just religion, but faith in general, there is always going to be difficulties that we in America face when we try to allow our faith to coexist with our everyday life. And of course, that includes a work-life balance. In most cases, I think employers are very understanding that the makeup of their businesses includes men and women of different faiths, and that includes having different holidays and different dietary needs and religious practices that might require Muslims to have the ability during the day to go and pray. It might mean that Jewish workers have the ability to have kosher food. It might mean the ability for Christians to have other rights. And I think that in most cases, what we've seen in America is that businesses are very tolerant, very understanding. We certainly live in a 21st century of political correctness. And I think in most cases, employers really do try to allow their workers to be comfortable with their religion. But that being said, we also have to understand that sometimes we can't allow our religion to be the priority, because we have to sometimes bend the rules in order to work, and we make choices every day. And one of those choices might be where we work.
To you now, Professor Hornbeck, let's talk about the public sphere. Do you agree with critics who say that government laws and regulations are interfering with religious liberties, particularly with respect to Catholic religious teachings? Of course, this past week, we saw the Supreme Court taking up the case of the Little Sisters of the Poor, objecting to a government effort to attach contraceptive insurance to their insurance plan. The Little Sisters wouldn't have to pay for it, but they objected to even the principle of it being attached. How do you reconcile that kind of situation?
Randall, that's a great question. And this has been something that's been in the news for at least the last 8 or 9 years, ever since the debate on the Affordable Care Act began. There was a question about reconciling religious liberties with the regulations from the government. I think one of the things that often gets confused in this debate is we talk about the American value of religious freedom. And the very first people who came to America, for the most part, were not seeking religious freedom for everyone. They were seeking religious freedom for themselves. Most of those first colonies wanted to have a space where they could practice their particular religion unmolested. So there's a very complex history to this religious liberty debate in America. I think all too often sometimes these historical ideals are invoked by folks who may not see all the nuances in them. But as to this particular question, you know, we are all living in a space, those of us who are religious, those of us who are not religious, where we're trying to be part of a society that recognizes and values the differences of everybody. And I think that that refers to that there will be times when people need to go along. There will be times when people need to push back. The courts are in the middle of figuring that out right now. But as Rabbi Miller was just saying, I think there are times when a religious person needs to say, I can't go any farther. And there are times as well when a religious person needs to say, you know, I can't impose my values on the rest of society.
Does that go to that New Testament verse about rendering to Caesar the things which are Caesar's?
Well, that's complicated too, because as you know, Jesus was living under Roman occupation at the time, and he was making a political point referring to his own day. But I think there's a lot of lessons here. The Little Sisters of the Poor case that you referred to is a really interesting one, because the question is how much so-called cooperation with what they consider to be immoral activity is permissible. And even within the framework of Catholic moral theology, there are many people who would say that the Little Sisters are so far removed from contraception that they're not really involved in materially sponsoring it. Of course, they disagree with that. And the courts aren't there to impose Catholic moral theology. The courts are there to look at what's appropriate in the First Amendment in a pluralistic society.
The Pew Research Center has polled Americans on shifting religious views over the past several years. In 2014, it found that nearly a quarter of American adults claim no religious affiliation. That's up from 16% in 2007. Among those unaffiliated Americans, 61% say they do believe in God in some form. That's down from about 10% from 7 years earlier. And among all adults, religiously affiliated and not, only 55% say they pray in some manner every day. That's down from 58%, not much, in 2007. Let me pose this question to you, Professor Hornbeck. Why do you think fewer Americans are identifying as religious today?
Well, the key to statistic for me is about religiosity versus spirituality. We are living in a time, Randall, as you know, where so many institutions are coming under suspicion, whether that be the government, whether that be our police forces, and religious institutions, especially with the scandals and revelations, not only in the Roman Catholic Church, but in other churches and other religious organizations over the past few decades, they don't have the credibility that they may be used to. So even the numbers that you just talked about show that while Americans may be moving away from organized religion, there certainly is a desire for many people to connect to something beyond themselves, something transcendent.
Imam Hindi, that same poll, by the way, shows an increase in those who identify as non-Christians, including Muslims. Have you observed more religious attachment in your circles, and if so, why?
You know, I guess one has to speak about different experiences, you know, in America vis-a-vis Europe, vis-a-vis the Middle East, vis-a-vis Asia. I have seen more or movement forward, moving closer to Islam. But I think the problem is not moving forward or back, closer or farther. The problem is the message of our religious institutions relevant to the lives of our young men and women? I dare to say that many of our religious institutions within the case of Muslims or Christianity or Judaism seems sometimes irrelevant. We speak more of dogma than of relevance. We speak more of theology than of realism. We speak more of the life after vis-a-vis the here. And therefore, for people to move closer to Islam, closer to Judaism, to Christianity, to spirituality, I think we need to reconstruct our understanding of God. We need to reconstruct our understanding of our scriptures, and we need to make these religions relevant to the challenges of day-to-day affairs of our young men and women. How often do we speak about social justice, political justice, environmental justice? How often do we speak of issues that matter to women, to men, equality, equal pay, issues of freedom? All those issues are big, real issues that many of our clergy run away from or shy away from. We need to put them in the forefront. We need to put them on the table, and that is what will bring people closer to religion or closer to God.
Imam Hindi, thank you. And Rabbi Miller, I will give you the final word on that issue.
Well, absolutely. Well, I agree with the professor. I think when you look at the Pew Research Center study, which I've had a chance to take a look at over the past couple of years, and there was certainly a focus on the Jewish people in America, I think we do have to compare religiosity and spirituality. And I think that even though more American Jews might be moving away from religion, we also see that there's a lot of blending and a lot of, I would say, new ways of looking at religion and spirituality in Jewish America. And that includes, as the Imam said, social action and environmentalism and things of that nature. And there's certainly more blending. You know, progressive Jews are becoming more observant. The orthodoxy is certainly growing at a rapid pace. And there are more people expressing their religion, certainly Jewish religion, in new and different ways in the 21st century, and I applaud that.
Rabbi Jason Miller, Professor Patrick Hornback, Imam Yahya Hindi, thank you for joining us on Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
And before we go, here's a look at other stories we'll be watching in the week ahead. On Monday, former Guatemalan President Otto Perez Molina will be back in court for the first time since his arrest last September on corruption charges. A judge will hear from prosecutors and defense attorneys before deciding whether Perez Molina's case